Hello, my name is David, and this is the second in a series of videos on Japanese new religious movements. If you don't know what a new religious movement is, I suggest watching my previous video about Soka Gakkai. Today's topic is the most notorious cult in Japanese history, a group so infamous that it helped spur the creation of bioterrorism laws in Japan. The organisation I'm referring to is Shinrikyō, the Supreme Truth Sect. A quick note before we begin: I know it's spelt like Aum in English, but the first part of the name is spelled and pronounced Om in Japanese. I'll be using this pronunciation throughout the video. The story of Shinrikyō is very much also the story of its founder and figure of devotion, Chizuo Matsumoto, better known by the name he later assumed, Shoko Asahara. Asahara, born in 1955, did not come from a religious background. He was a mostly blind acupuncturist from southern Japan, whose interest in religion began in the 1980s, following the demise of his business after he got into legal trouble for selling fake Chinese remedies. It was during this time of difficulty that Asahara claimed to have been contacted by the Hindu god Shiva, who informed him of his duty to preach the cosmic truth and save his fellow man from the apocalypse. Shinrikyō was formed in 1987, but only received official recognition as a religious corporation in 1989. And while Asahara initially preached from his apartment in Tokyo, by the end of the decade he had established a compound in Yamanashi Prefecture close to Mount Fuji. Thousands of people joined the religion, they bought his books and tapes, attended his lectures, and donated heavily, all in the hopes of achieving enlightenment through Asahara's teachings. Shinrikyō's coffers filled steadily, and the religion grew steadily too, reaching roughly 5,000 members by 1990. Everything was hunky-dory. Except everything was very much not hunky-dory. Shinrikyō was advertised to prospective members as a yoga and meditation movement, but the group's real practices were much stranger and much more dangerous. Some of the more benign activities included praying to Asahara, who presented himself as the Messiah, and donning PSI or Perfect Salvation Initiative headgear, a jumble of wires and electrodes that supposedly allowed users to synchronize their brainwaves with Asahara's. Less harmless was thermotherapy, where adherents would purify themselves by submerging their feet in boiling water, an activity that is known to have killed at least one person. Some members were also subject to enforced fasting at Asahara's will, and anyone thought to be disloyal to was subject to beatings. Those who escaped were not safe either, as several ex-Om disciples were also kidnapped and brought back to the group. Aside from donations, some of Om's funding came from businesses the religion owned, such as restaurants and a computer firm, where members of the group were ordered to work, usually for no pay. Other income streams included threatening local officials with the establishment of an Shinrikyō branch in the city unless they were paid off, and the manufacture of drugs, primarily LSD and methamphetamine, which were sold to the Yakuza. Though I will also add that some of the LSD was kept for use within the group. Shoko Asahara might have been the savior of mankind to his disciples, but his attitude towards them was anything but benevolent. With his position within he could make his followers do anything, including commit murder. On November 5th, 1989, a group of disciples killed lawyer Tsutsumi Sakamoto, his wife and one-year-old baby in their home in the early hours of the morning. Sakamoto had been involved in an investigation into Shinrikyō on behalf of former members of the religion, and was thus considered a threat. Asahara used a concept called Poa to justify the killing. The term comes from Tibetan Buddhism, and in that context refers to releasing the consciousness of a dying person so that they can reach an afterlife with less difficulty. Asahara reinterpreted Poa as killing someone sinful to prevent them from accumulating more negative karma, thereby receiving a less favourable rebirth, It took several years for the killers to be identified and convicted, with one of them, Hideo Murai, dying before he could make it to trial, for reasons we will touch on soon. Also in 1989, the Shinrikyō, or Supreme Truth Party, was formed with the goal of winning seats in the 1990 general election, with Asahara himself fielded as a candidate. If you've seen my previous video, you'll know that this violated Article 20 of the Constitution, but in time, you'll come to realise just how many new religions in Japan ignore this article. Back to the Shinrikyō, despite voter intimidation and the destruction of rival parties' campaign posters, Asahara and his disciples failed to win any of the 512 seats in the House of Representatives. If you do much research into Aum Shinrikyo yourself, you'll see this failure to achieve political power regularly cited as a major reason for Asahara's further embrace of violence. Another oft overlooked event that most certainly contributed to this hostile view of the world was the 1990 retreat to the island of Ishigaki-jima in Okinawa. Approximately 1,000 Aum Shinrikyo members went on this retreat, but unfortunately for them, Japanese journalists took a great interest in the affair. They saw a large amount of religious fanatics and a remote location and thought, hey, we might have another Jonestown. Like a horde of locusts, hundreds of reporters descended onto the island, and with not enough accommodation or resources to support both the journalists and Aum Shinrikyo members, they effectively killed the retreat. But what did I mean when I said that Asahara further embraced violence? Well, when he first started preaching, he claimed that Armageddon could be prevented by spreading the divine truth. But by the 90s, Asahara instead taught that the apocalypse was now unavoidable, with only Aum Shinrikyo members able to survive the destruction of society. The failure of both the Ishigaki-jima retreat and Asahara's political ambitions seems to have spurred another evolution of this concept. The world was going to end, and Aum Shinrikyo was going to make it happen. Several avenues for building a doomsday arsenal were explored. For example, Aum Shinrikyo spread to Russia, with this venture led by Fumihiro Joyu, who will become relevant later. In addition to gaining new converts, Aum members met up with military officials who were rather eager to sell off the country's sizable armory. The Soviet Union had just collapsed after all, and the Russian economy was far from good. Aum personnel bought an AK-47 with plans to reproduce it, and an Mi-24 helicopter. That of course wasn't enough for Asahara, who not only sent members of the religion to Australia to search for uranium deposits to build nukes, their mission thankfully failed, but he also sent Aum personnel to the Democratic Republic of Congo under the pretense of being a medical delegation. Why? To get a sample of Ebola to use as a bioweapon. This mission thankfully failed too. Asahara didn't give up on bioweaponry, however, after realizing how unfeasible it was to make nukes, and he eventually settled on sarin gas.
Sarin nerve gas. It's colorless, odorless, but it sure as hell ain't painless.
Produced in the Yamanashi Prefecture compound, sarin gas was first put to successful use in June of 1994, when it was released near an apartment block in the city of Matsumoto. The aim was to kill a number of judges who were likely to rule against Aum Shinrikyo in an upcoming case regarding a land purchase in the city. The gas killed 8 people, including a woman who was rendered comatose and died several years later, and sickened hundreds of others. The police response was equally as shocking. One of the apartment's residents, Yoshiyuki Kono, whose wife was the one put into a coma, was blamed for the event. Police used flimsy evidence, such as the presence of gardening chemicals in his shed and the fact that him and his family were the first ones affected by the gas, to create a narrative that Kono had been trying to make a strong pesticide, which went horribly wrong. The media ran with the story of a man accidentally creating a chemical disaster, and when the gas was discovered to have been sarin, he was framed as a domestic terrorist instead, with the police attempting to force a confession out of him. Only after substantial scientific scrutiny, i.e. showing that you can't make sarin gas with fertilizer, was Kono actually cleared of all wrongdoing. Unfortunately for the Japanese public, this was just a prelude to Ohm's most infamous attack. The 20th of March 1995 was a normal Monday morning for commuters in the Tokyo metro. In the busyness of rush hour, few people took notice of the strange, punctured packages leaking fluid onto the floor of their trains. These packages were planted by Ohm and contained the same sarin gas that had already turned Yoshiyuki Kono and several others' worlds upside down. Striking several train lines in a short span of time, Ohm Shinrikyō operatives succeeded in killing 8 people on the day, with 4 others dying soon after and another 2 dead from sarin complications years later. Over 1,000 commuters received permanent injuries or disabilities from the attack, with thousands more sickened less severely. The incident made international headlines and generated massive outrage nationally. Coverage of the incident dominated every Japanese news channel, and some of the early reports contained footage of people actively dying from the sarin gas. Despite the havoc that was wrought, the death toll was far lower than Asahara had desired, and the operation was not considered a great success. Some of the sarin packages were not opened or opened only partially, thus limiting the gas's effect. On top of all this, one of the perpetrators, named Kenichi Hirose, succeeded in poisoning himself, although he managed to receive an antidote from his getaway vehicle. This time, the police were quite certain Ohm Shinrikyō was behind the attack. After all, they had received reports the year prior that the new religion had ordered the necessary chemicals to produce sarin gas, and that there were strange smells coming from their compound. This apparently wasn't alarming enough to warrant a raid. But in May of 1995, the police finally put a boot through Asahara's door and arrested him and several others. One man they didn't arrest was Hideo Murai, one of the men involved in the Sakamoto family murder. Just a month after the Tokyo metro attack, Murai was stabbed to death in broad daylight by a member of the Yamaguchi-gumi Yakuza group. Why? As previously mentioned, Ohm had business dealings with the Yakuza in the form of drug sales. And after the sarin gas incident, the Yakuza probably wanted to cut ties and seal lips for good measure. The assassin, Hiroyuki Jo, got 12 years in prison for the killing. Just a warning before this next clip, it depicts Murai getting stabbed.
カメラ D は入り口横で犯行直前の容疑者の姿を捉えていました。
まだ混乱は続いているようです。現場が今徐々に入り口の方に近づいてきているんですが、報道陣のあまりにも、数の多さに全く村井氏の姿が見えません。罵声が飛び交っています。今ようやく入り口の方に入っていきます。
Asahara both ordered and committed some truly atrocious acts against the Japanese public and his own disciples, and for that, he was given the death penalty alongside at least 6 other high-ranking members. It took a very long time for his sentence to be carried out, owing to investigations and appeals. But in 2018, Shoko Asahara was executed via hanging. With the eternal guru dead, has Ohm Shinrikyō finally disappeared? No, actually. Although it has hemorrhaged most of its members, Ohm Shinrikyō survived into the new millennium, changing its name to Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph has officially apologized for the horrendous acts its members carried out, but still worships Asahara as their savior. Even more bizarrely, 2 separate groups have splintered from Aleph: Hikari no Wa, or Circle of Light, founded by Fumihiro Joyu, the guy who spearheaded Ohm's operations in Russia, and Yamadara no Shudan, which literally means Yamada's group, because we don't have a proper name for them. Do these 2 groups still worship Asahara? Yamada's group definitely does, and while it's not as clear in the case of Hikari no Wa, Japan's Public Security Intelligence Agency still believes that they do. Oh, and remember Ohm's expansion into Russia? Well, according to Russian state news agency RIA Novosti, there are still Ohm members there too. And the prosecutor's office estimates that there's several thousand in number. To be honest though, Russian citizens have much bigger fish to fry right now. Like in the previous video, here are a few bits of trivia before we finish up. In an effort to further promote the group, Ohm Shinrikyō produced several animated videos, some of which feature Asahara singing. Have a listen.
"誰でも持っているみんなの心に持っている遥かな虫の過去から持っている人に誰でも隠れてるみんなの心に隠れてる無名の闇を越えて超越人力だ."
Among Asahara's many assassination targets were Daisaku Ikeda, the now former leader of Soka Gakkai, and Ryuho Okawa, the founder of Kohuku no Kagaku, a new religion which I'd love to talk about. Both survived their respective attacks, but the attack on Ikeda spurred the creation of the Kinjokai, which I mentioned in the trivia section of the previous video. I actually got my hands on a physical copy of one of Ohm Shinrikyo's books published pre-sarin gas attack, 1992's Kiseki no Empowermento, or Miraculous Empowerment. This one is all about the supposed benefits of Asahara's mystical yoga, including the prospect of being able to levitate, or curing your illnesses without medicine. Another aspect of note is the advertising within. Not only did Ohm promote itself via its Enjoy Happiness magazine and Asahara's radio broadcasts, they also had an online chat room. Check out those specs. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and hope that this topic wasn't too dour. Aleph, Hikari no Wa, and Yamadara no Shudan are all under surveillance from the Japanese authorities. But given their sordid past, I can't imagine any of these groups achieving major popularity ever again. Had the Japanese police investigated Ohm in time, things could have turned out very differently. My next video in this series will probably concern Kohuku no Kagaku, but before that, I have a few ideas for videos that don't necessarily concern new religions. Until then though, thank you and take care.